everyone. Welcome to SGA's Civic Engagement and Social Action Series. Today's conversation is sponsored by the Student Government Association and co-sponsored by the Office of Student Involvement. It's designed for students to learn about how they can engage in important issues that affect the world around them. The views in today's conversations are the opinion of the panelists and do not reflect those of the university. As part of the series, we are encouraging students to register to vote. DePaul utilizes a platform called TurboVote to assist students in registering to vote no matter what state they live in. You can get registered by visiting depaul.turbovote.org. In addition to getting registered, you can sign up to receive updates and reminders regarding deadlines for all elections in your area. With that, please join me in welcoming today's guest, Caroline McAteer.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you today, and I'm really thrilled because I love DePaul. I love civic action. I've worked at DePaul for 19 years, most of that time in the Career Center, and for the last year and a half, I've been the Director of Development, so that means raising money in the Office of Advancement. But for the last 20 or so years outside of my job at DePaul, I have been involved in a variety of different social justice action initiatives and can tell you a little bit more about that, Alyssa, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So one of the questions that I am interested in asking and saw when I was reading more about you and what you do was I saw that you worked as the president of the Danny Did Foundation for a couple of times, a couple of years. And I remember hearing about that in middle school. So yeah, because I went to middle school in Edgebrook. So we heard a lot about Danny Did and talked about it for a little bit. To be honest, I was 7th and 8th grade, so I don't really remember everything. But can you share more about that and your experiences working with them?
Sure. So I love Danny Did almost as much as I love DePaul. The Danny Did Foundation is named after a little boy, Danny, who lived in Edgebrook, and he died from a seizure when he was just about to turn 4. So the last line in his obituary was, "Go and enjoy life, Danny Did." And that is where the name of the Danny Did Foundation comes from. And so the organization brings me a lot of joy because I have epilepsy. And so what we do with this organization is really raise awareness of epilepsy, seizures, how to prevent deaths caused by seizures. But it's a really joyful organization because we do a lot in the community. We do a lot to help people and really just raise awareness about a disease that oftentimes people don't talk about. And 1 in 26 Americans have this disease. So I got involved with it when I heard about Danny and his death. I thought, I am so lucky that despite having epilepsy, it's controlled. And so I want to help this organization and help other families who aren't as lucky as I am. So got involved, volunteered, did a lot of grunt work just by volunteering. Then I was asked to join the board. And then a few years later, I became president and did that for 3 years and still sit on the board just as a board member. So it all really just started with reaching out and volunteering because I was passionate about their mission.
Well, thank you. I think a lot of people, when they think civic engagement and social change, a lot of the things that come into mind is politics. At least that's one of the things that I jump to when I think of that. But it's nice because that also applies to nonprofit organizations and just even local governments. Still talking about politics, but so it's really nice that you got involved with all of that. I found it really cool because, like I said before, I grew up listening about and hearing about Danny Did, and to meet someone who's worked so heavily involved with that nonprofit is really cool. I'm also interested. You work with DePaul, obviously, and you are currently the Director of Development, and then worked with the Career Center. What's your experience like for that? What does your day-to-day life look like for that?
Sure. So when I worked in the Career Center, I managed our employer engagement. So employers that were looking to recruit DePaul students, my main role was managing those relationships. And then I did some fundraising with the Danny Did Foundation. I did some fundraising when I ran for state senate and realized I loved fundraising. So I applied for a job in the Office of Advancement, and where we are really tasked with raising money to support students through scholarships, the Student Emergency Assistance Fund, a variety of different ways. So to be able to combine my passion for DePaul and our mission with something I really like doing, fundraising. It's sort of like my dream job.
That's really
and so
cool.
my day-to-day is reaching out to donors, people who have generously supported us in the past, thanking them, talking with them about other ways to get involved. We have a new campaign called Now We Must. You may have heard of that. And so we're actively fundraising for that campaign.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Caroline,
Courtney.
oh, no, go ahead. Oh, if you want to keep going. Otherwise, I was going to ask if it's okay, Alyssa.
Mhm.
I heard you mention that you had the opportunity to run for state senate. So
yeah,
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about what the steps were that led you to that. Like what your engagement perhaps looked like before, and what really was the decider to really dive into that. I know I talk to a lot of students who have aspirations of.
Mm-hmm.
They say, like, I want to be a U.S. senator, or I want to be in the U.S. House of Representatives, and sometimes they skip over, the more local things. So, just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So, as many DePaul students, SGAA and many of our students are volunteering. So, I was doing a lot of volunteer work back in the late '90s, early 2000s, working with an AIDS floor at Illinois Masonic Hospital. I volunteered with senior citizens who were homebound, volunteered with soup kitchens, the Lincoln Park Community Shelter. So I was very actively involved in the community. And at one point, I started volunteering for former Congressman Rahm Emanuel, who became the mayor of Chicago. But I volunteered for his campaign in 2002, which led me to kind of get this bug for really loved door knocking, asking people for their support, talking to strangers about legislation like women's issues, public education, childcare issues. Like, to be able to volunteer on a political campaign, it's a unique opportunity to talk to strangers about issues that really impact them. There's no other time. You can't just walk up to someone, on the train and say, hey, you want to talk about public education and why we need funding for that? So I did a lot of volunteer work with campaigns. And then I realized I had this moment of thinking, I want to be on the other side, where I'm the one writing legislation and making a direct impact in people's lives, not the one supporting a candidate. I want to be that person. So I knew that it was going to take a while to get to that point. And I talked to a lot of elected officials who gave me some really good advice. And one piece of advice that really stuck with me was, you need to build your community. So people needed to know who I was in the community. I needed to have people who would really vouch for me. So when I ran for office, they would say, oh, I know her. She's, I know Caroline. She's, great, or whatever. The other thing I did was I applied to a program called the Illinois Women Institute for Leadership, and went through that program. It's called I Will, where they take 12 women from throughout Illinois, Democratic women, and they train us on how to run for office, on everything from writing speeches to fundraising to crisis communication, how to give an interview in front of a Tribune editorial board. I had to do that. So I went through that training program, again, with my goal on running for office someday. Long story short, my state senator got in trouble for doing some inappropriate things on Facebook. And so the opportunity arose where I thought, here's a chance for me to really put myself out there in the community and say, this is not acceptable, what this person has been doing. And I ran for office. So it was me and 3 males on the ballot. Obviously, I didn't win, but it was an incredible experience. I won't ever do it again, I learned, but I had this dream of doing it for about 10 years and pursued it and learned that it's just not something I want to do again.
Yeah. Hey, that's great though. Not everybody actually has that, or they say it, but they don't actually do it. So that's spectacular to hear about.
Yeah, it was definitely a great experience. I have a daughter who's in 6th grade and she was in 4th grade at the time. So she knocked on doors with me. She got really involved. So that was fun.
Yeah. So as a follow-up question, and I was thinking about this particularly when you talked about actually knocking on the doors.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that there were a lot of times that as you were knocking on those doors, you perhaps encountered somebody that had a very differing opinion than a stance that you had. And, today, especially right now, we know that the country is very, very divided. And it sometimes feels like we are, our backs are up against the wall and trying to communicate with others. So I'm curious if you have any, tips or advice, or perhaps times where you really encountered a situation where you just thought, like, I'm never going to get through to this person, and how you dealt with that, and advice for our students about how they could, best communicate through those moving forward.
Yeah, so that's a great question. In 2007, I was volunteering for Hillary's campaign, and I was at Soldier Field walking around collecting signatures for her to get on the ballot. So in order to get on the ballot, you have to collect thousands of signatures, depending on what office you're running for. And this gentleman came up to me, and he had very, very different views on certain issues than Hillary did. And he was rude, but the way I took it was just that, there's people like that are going to disagree with me. I'm just going to say thank you and walk away. And, especially now, because politics are so heated, I think that's the best way to handle any sort of potential disagreement with someone when it comes to politics. Is I feel like it's just to say thank you and respect your opinion and walk away. Normally, I would love to get involved in a political discussion with someone of a differing opinion, but right now I feel like probably the best way is just to say, we have different views on this. But I have knocked on doors before where people weren't happy, slammed the door in my face. And my daughter was with me once, and she said, "Oh, Mom, why was that person, mean to you?" And I said, "Oh, she just didn't want to talk to me." So, I think it's I don't know if that answers your question, but I always err on the side now of just to be extra cautious and not engage too much with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think it speaks to, like, and it sounds like from some of the situations that you were like the analogy of, like, having a door slammed in your face, right? That is a clear, I don't want to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like, especially today, like, you can tell when people are willing to engage in a conversation, right? Yeah. Versus, like, the either literal or figurative, you're going to get a door slammed in your face. And so I think it's important for people to think about, like, if you know that the person you're talking to or the situation you're in is going to result in that, I think that advice is absolutely wonderful. Like, it's okay to walk away and step away, because you're not going to get anywhere, right? And to be able to know, like, because if somebody wants to talk to you, they'll ask questions. They'll lean into a conversation, and they'll want to talk, versus, like, just a challenging conversation overall. So yeah, I think that's what you said hits the nail on the head.
And the conversations that you'll have with people, not right now necessarily at doors, but on the phone, if you're phone banking for a candidate, most people won't want to talk to you, but for the 20% that do, those conversations are so amazing, because you're able to talk to a complete stranger, like I was saying earlier, about issues that really matter to that person. And I remember the last time I did phone banking was a few years ago. Well, it was 2 years ago for myself. I just love that part of it, is having those conversations. But it all starts with the very local level, volunteering for an elected official. It could be an alderman. It could be someone who's running for their board of education, if it's in the suburbs, a village trustee, and just getting that experience under your belt. And DePaul students are amazing at doing that, and just getting themselves out there. And I think the fact that you guys are putting this kind of series on speaks volumes to that.
Definitely. I think having hard conversations are really important. It does suck, though, when you get, like, a door slammed in your face, or physical or metaphoric, like, whichever it is. And it's really hard when you're having conversations with people and they just shut it off right away, rather than actually, going back and forth and having a dialogue, or else we don't learn from one another. I think the fault that everyone tends to have is that we enter a conversation with so much pride and so much, like, such a strong mindset that our way is the only way, that we refuse to listen to anyone else, which I think is good, being, strong-minded and stubborn to a certain extent. But when it comes to, like, hurting someone else or refusing to listen, then it's just ignorance. But I think another problem that we tend to have is then because we're so set in our minds, or sometimes we refuse to have hard conversations, I know it's like an echo chamber, right? We only surround ourselves with people who agree with what we say, because it's a much easier conversation, and it's more fun and enjoyable.
And I want to know, like, people who think completely the opposite that I think right now with things going on in the world. I want to know why they think that way. What is it about their background or their experience that is leading them to think that? Like, and then I can share why I feel the way I do about certain issues. But I love watching like the cable news when they interview undecided people, or they interview people from the other aisle, because I want to hear what they are thinking and what is causing them to feel a certain way. So to your point, Alyssa, it's so important to know what brings people to their decision to feel a certain way about political issues.
Definitely. I lost my train of thought for a second, but
that's okay. I have another question, if that's okay, Alyssa.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I imagine, Caroline, through this process, you've found a lot of mentors, right? Yeah. And you've found relationships for people who have helped you, like navigate this process.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what is it you looked for in a mentor? And can you just talk a little bit about what role that relationship played throughout your experiences so far?
Sure. Well, I don't have anyone in my family that's ever run for political office. So I was starting like at square one. So I knew that the only way that I was going to learn how to really do this successfully was to talk to other elected officials. So female elected officials are really willing to just sit down, and I was younger then, so maybe 10 or 15 years ago, reaching out to women and saying, would you be willing to give me some advice, and meeting them for coffee. And it could be a quick 30-minute conversation, but asking them for advice on what do I need to know to run for office. And some of them were conversations with male mentors and getting advice and finding out, what do I not know right now that I need to learn so that when I run for office, I'm prepared. So the conversations are, just reaching out and finding someone who's in a position you want to be in someday, and not being afraid to reach out through an email or phone call and saying, I'm a student at DePaul and I would just love to learn about your role with the board of trustees or with the village trustees, whatever it might be. Would you be willing to talk with me for 25 or 30 minutes about your career path and offer me advice? And people love giving advice, especially if they love what they're doing. So my mentors didn't just like land in my lap. I had to go out and find them. And so that's one thing I learned is don't be afraid to ask. And they're not just going to like walk up to you and say, hey, I'll sit down and have coffee with you. You have to ask.
I think that's amazing advice. And also, because you talked about like reaching out to mentors who are women entering this like political environment. Atmosphere sounds a little weird to say. But I think something that I always keep in my mind is, while it's really important for me to like think about all of the communities and identities I identify with, like, being a woman or a woman of color or being Filipino, I think sometimes there comes to an extent where I'm so focused on that. I don't know if I'm phrasing the question right. So, but so focused on that where it's great that it's like pushing me to strive harder. But sometimes to me, I think about how I am in a marginalized community, how like if I'm entering a room and it's all men and I'm the only woman, part of me is like, I got to fight harder, but another part of me is like, I'm a little worried, I'm not going to lie, or, a little anxious in those situations. So how have you, I guess, entered those conversations in those spaces where you may have been like the only woman, like you said, for the Illinois State Senate, you were the only woman against 3 men. So how do you really like enter that and fight and not let it be a hindrance to you, but something that
I would say the most intimidating experience I had was interviewing with the Chicago Tribune editorial board. So they interview all elected officials and candidates to endorse them. And it's a dark wooded, large conference room, very old school, like men's club kind of thing. And I knew it was going to be very difficult because most of the people on the editorial board were not of the same political mind frame that I am. So I just remember thinking, and then my 3 male opponents were sitting next to me. I just remember thinking, I've got to do this. I have to do this, and gave myself a little prep talk before I walked in that room. And now I feel like anytime I get nervous about something, I think about, if I can walk into the Chicago Tribune editorial boardroom and pull that off, I can do anything. So honestly, I think it's just like giving yourself a little mini pep talk and thinking, and not letting yourself feel like people are judging you, which is easier said. It's so much easier said than done. But if you can block out what other people might be thinking or might not be thinking, and just focus on what's important to you and the words coming out of your mouth, that's kind of how I've been able to get through some nerve-wracking situations.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's really important to really focus on that one like really hard time that you were able to overcome, just because that's always encouraging.
Oh, sorry. If you were going to switch, I think the other thing that's important, like about this, and like for you particularly, I mean, like you identify as a woman of color, right? So if there, I think the other point I just want to make to say in this is, especially for our students who might be white or viewers who might be white, if you identify that you're sitting on the other side of the table and that's the situation, you're in a position and a place of privilege where you can do things to make that other candidate feel more comfortable. And like, if I am, I end up in a lot of spaces where, it's all men and me, like just by the nature of my work, or, I might be in a room that has more white folks than people of color. But knowing my situation, if someone walks in and is like, if you can recognize like that they have a salient identity that might be on the margins, you as the person on the other side of the table can also make it a point to make that person feel comfortable. Like one of the Betty Shanahan, who you two might know, one of the favorite quotes that she ever taught me was she shared, it might have been, I have to figure out exactly who said it, but she always said that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women.
Oh, it was Madeline Albright. Madeline Albright said that.
I wasn't sure. Yeah. I thought it was, but I didn't want to misquote her. But so I think about that quote a lot right now. And if I am sitting at a table with other men, and because I serve as a director, I have that opportunity to do that. And if I have a female person come in, I have a responsibility to make that other person feel comfortable. So it's not necessarily advice for the person at the table, but I know DePaul is an institution that's a predominantly white institution, right? We're a PWI, and we have a lot of students who are white. So I think for you to think about like how, or for folks who are white to think about like how they can show up in those spaces. I think that's really important to think about too.
Yeah.
Because that's how you be an ally, right? Like that's allyship in a nutshell, is like showing up for those people, so that if somebody does show up and they see it, like they can feel a little bit more comfortable. And
it could just be making eye contact and smiling at that person. Like I feel like a warm smile can go so far. It can go a long way. But you're right, Courtney, we have to use our white privilege to help other people.
Yeah. And it pre-COVID, getting up and welcoming people instead of, like Caroline, I imagine like in that room, they probably sat at the table and said like, sit down, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
I've been in a lot of those rooms, so I know what that looks like, right? But like, I for what it's worth, I just think, especially for students who are white and who are going either in leadership positions or who will be in, like, you have a duty and a response. And even in Zoom, you can do it, right? Like you can send people a message and say, we're happy you're here. Like, thanks for being here. You're doing a great job, right? Like those types of reinforcements make a big difference.
I need to do that more with Zoom. That's a really good point, especially when there's like 30 people on a call. And there's like that awkwardness a little bit. You're right. Just sending a quick little chat message to that person. Yeah. One of the things I think DePaul students have to their advantage is we're in this city, Chicago, which has its challenges, but we also have like this incredible diversity of opportunities for students to get involved. And really make a difference. And our students are already doing that. Like, I don't need to say, go out and make a difference, because our students are already doing that. And, you know, I think the biggest thing is just to find out what you're passionate about, whether it's helping homeless people or homebound senior citizens or elected officials, and finding a way to get involved with that.
Definitely.
And running for office is totally possible. I think the biggest thing is just to build up your network, your community.
Yeah, I really like the advice that you mentioned earlier about like going and finding mentors rather than like having someone kind of take you under their wing.
Yeah.
I think being more proactive in that sense is really great advice. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's watching. It was really a beautiful, nice conversation to have with you.
Oh, so nice to meet you. I'm going to tell Danny that you heard all about that.
Yeah, 7th and 8th grade. I remember that.
Oh.
So thank you everyone for watching. SGA meets weekly on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Follow us on social media and join us next Tuesday. And also remember to vote. I also want to plug in that.
Oh, yes. Go vote. Like, your life depends on it.
Yes, it really does, especially for a lot of people. So today, also, I wanted to plug in that today is a National Day of Action to support immigrant communities. And so what SGA is doing is we have a social media campaign showing support that we stand in solidarity with our undocumented students at DePaul. So be on a lookout for that as well. It's being posted on Instagram and on Facebook. And with that, thanks, everyone. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.